Gospel is written in the 11th chapter of St. John, and I'm going to begin there with the 17th verse. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again on the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. And those who believe in me, even though they die, shall live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at a place where Martha had left him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus again greatly disturbed came to the tomb. It was a cave and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with stripes of clothes, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. One of the great songs that we had, at least as a youth in our Bible camp, was the song called "Dry Bones," an old Negro spiritual, talking about the vision that Ezekiel had. "Dry Bones" was a rocking song. We loved to sing it, but I don't think we ever knew the significance of it very well. But that is a part of our text this morning, our pericope text. Ezekiel was a great prophet, and he warned the people what would happen if they didn't follow God and keep in his path. And what happened then was they didn't obey, they didn't follow, they didn't keep the promise, they didn't follow the covenant, and now one country after another was sieging the country of Israel. They had just been overcome by Babylon. Babylon thought it was easier, rather than send people down to Israel to govern the Jews, decided that they would transport them back to Babylon. And here were a people in captivity. Not only that, but Babylon had come down and destroyed the city of Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple, the center of their worship, the place that they thought God dwelt. And it was a time of great despair. They were all in desolation. And as Ezekiel talks to them about their disobedience, the latter part of his book comes with a great promise. He has this vision of the dry bones. He comes and overlooks a big valley where there are nothing but dead corpse, where skeletons, where bodies used to be. And all of a sudden he hears God say something to him and ask him the question, can these bones live? And Ezekiel replies in his vision, well, it's kind of up to you. And then God gives him a command to yell to the people to live again. And then gradually Ezekiel has this vision of the bones joining together and flesh getting onto the bones and those people getting up and dancing. It's a story and a message of hope. And he tells the people, even though you have been disobedient, and now you look at your lives and you look at your country and you look at your faith, and it is a mess. It is just a valley of dry bones. There is still a message of hope because God will come through. There is always a promise that He will be faithful. He will keep His part of the covenant, and if you switch, things will change. And once again, you will live in His grace and love. The message from the gospel text is much the same. It's the story of the healing of Lazarus. This is a family that Jesus knew very well. He knew Lazarus and his two sisters. And he's out in the countryside and he is told that Lazarus had died. And oddly enough, as good a friend as he was, he pauses 2 days. And then he decides to go and visit Mary and Martha. And they're a little upset with him. They think he could have done something. And they both scold him. If you would have been here a couple of days ago, my brother wouldn't have died. And Jesus tells them and his disciples, he's kind of using this experience to show God's power. And so he calls Lazarus to come out of the tomb and live. The message of both the Old Testament and New Testament is simply this. There is always a power in hope, because if you line yourself with God, He will give you the grace to make it through the valley of the dry bones. Have you ever been in a valley of dry bones? I'm guessing that most of you have. And if you haven't been there, you certainly know somebody very close who has been in the valley of dry bones. What about those who are suffering a bad marriage? They've come to the altar, they've presented themselves in total love to each other and made the pledge forever and ever. And all of a sudden, things are disruptive, and they kind of drift away from each other and then find themselves at odds with each other, and then they're in court. And their marriage looks like a valley of dry bones. What of those who suffered job loss, got involved in an occupation that they thought would propel them with purpose and meaning, and either they get displaced or the company goes down, or they find them at odds with other workers or the managers, and they lose it. And all of a sudden, their life seems kind of disheveled. It is another valley of dry bones. And how about the healthy people that all of a sudden discover they have some debilitating illness that keeps them from really enjoying life, that envelops them in pain? And sometimes the pain is so great that they see nothing but dry bones. In family relationships, this family unit that are brothers and sisters and sons and daughters and mothers and fathers and grandparents, that unit that is supposed to be so strong in the center of the relationships of God's grace, suddenly fall apart, and there is scrambling between father and son, mother, daughter. All those relationships seem to be nothing but a valley of dry bones. There are many ways to die. You can die physically, but you can also die spiritually. You can die emotionally. You can die in terms of relationship. But the message of the New Testament text and the Old Testament text are the same today. If you are in the valley of the bones, there is a way that you can come back to life and experience new meaning and new life. The message of the Bible entirely is about people who were in valleys. Just a couple of weeks ago, we studied Abraham, the father of all these religions. At the age of 90, Abraham thought that all of his promises that he had been given were gone. He did not have a land. He did not really have a family. He did not have a progeny. And then when he got a son finally, he was asked to offer it up on the altar. Nothing but dry bones, but Abraham triumphs because God reminds him that he keeps his covenant. Joseph, one of the great sons of Jacob, sees himself in a special relationship as far as preserving the people of Israel. And he talks about it, and his brothers get so mad at him, they think they're going to kill him first, and then decide to throw him in a hole, and then sell him off as a slave to the Egyptians. And Joseph goes down there, gains some kind of popularity, then is accused of attacking the Pharaoh's wife, and is thrown into prison and left there to die. And then gets redeemed again and again. And even though he has looked in the valley, he is redeemed and becomes triumphant, a person of great renown in history. And Jesus came to people, one of the things that he always did with Zacchaeus, with Mary Magdalene, with the apostles, was the promise that your life will not be a valley of dry bones. It can have purpose and meaning if you grasp the grace of God and live it out with other people. You will persevere. So the first thing we learn from the text is God is in charge. God is the God of new life. And even if you are in these valleys, have trust and faith. But there is another message. And that message is, if you look around and you see others in your own valleys, then you are to be the messenger of God's grace and hope, and help them and say, like Christ said to Lazarus, come out and live. Things will be okay, and I'll help you get there. Not too long ago, I talked to somebody who had been at a class reunion. And they met somebody that they had known just when they graduated, and said that this woman had so much hope, so much promise. She wanted to be an artist. And now he met her and started talking about her life, and went through those pleasantries that you usually have after you haven't met somebody for a long time. How are things? You look just the same as you looked 30, 40 years ago, whatever it is. And they went through all the niceties, and then he said this woman talked about that she had wanted to be an artist. But after she thought about it for a while, and after she talked to her parents and counselors, they decided there might be something better in her life, and so she took up architecture. And finally she broke down and she started crying, and she said, actually, my life is a mess. I don't have any of the dreams fulfilled that I had. And I just think it's a hopeless case. And this person said, no, it isn't. And he tried to comfort her. He tried to, by logic, tell her what she could do now, and gave her some hope. He said it all seemed so fruitless. And he said, after she left, I had this thing in my heart, and I said, I just feel so bad for her, and I'd like to do something for her. And he said, finally, I just sat down and I wrote a letter. I told her a letter of how much potential she had, and talked about there were so many people that would like to see her happy. And if she wasn't happy now with the career she'd chosen, to just leave it. Because life is short. And if you're unhappy, you can't be of much use to anybody else. And he said, I sent the letter off, and as soon as I dropped it in the box, I started to wonder to myself, is this something I should have really gotten involved in? I sound like some kind of pompous jerk. And I don't know if she'll take any kind of hope from the letter whatsoever. He said, 3 months later, I received a letter in the mail from this woman saying, because you stopped to take time to listen to me and give me encouragement, your letter saved my life. I was actually contemplating suicide when I talked to you. Somebody took enough time to say, come out from the death and live again. Stories told about the great composer Verdi. Between the years of 1828 and 1830, he lost his wife and 2 young children. He went into a deep depression, this talented man, this great composer. He decided that he would not write again. But then he had given a promise. He had given a promise that he would complete an opera for somebody, and that contract had to be fulfilled. He was not very inspired when he wrote it. It was called King for a Day. And so it was performed, and the critics tore it apart. They said it shouldn't be called King for a Day, it should be called Opera for a Day, and then closed down. Once again, Verdi went into deep despair. As he was walking along the street one day, he met a man who knew him and said, his name was Morelli, and he said, asked him if he was doing anything. And Verdi said, no, I've given up writing music. He said, come along to me to the opera house. I want to show you something. Morelli had just written a new opera, or a new manuscript called Nabucco. It was about the Jews being taken to exile by the Babylonians. And the tragedy of that, and then the rebirth of new hope, probably coming from Ezekiel's The Valley of the Dry Bones. He said, read this. Verdi said, no, I'm not interested. Morelli insisted. He shoved the manuscript in his pocket, shoved him out the door, and he said, go home and read it. So Verdi went back to his house and put it on the table, determined not to read it again. And then he got kind of curious. He started to read a little bit and then read the whole manuscript. He brought it back to Morelli the next morning, and Morelli said, how did you like it? He said, well, it was kind of inspiring, but I don't write music anymore. I'm never going to write music again. I just got torn apart last time. I don't have any spirit for it. Actually, my life is in ruins. Morelli says, put music to it. Verdi said, no, won't do it. He said, put music to it. It's something that you have to do. He said, put music to it. He put the manuscript back in his pocket, shoved him out the door, and locked it. Verdi went home and started looking at it, and then wrote a couple measures, and little by little he became inspired again. And it was at that point that he began the long march back to immortality as a composer. simply because somebody called him out of the dead and gave him hope. I've asked some of you to see, or told all of you, I guess, to see The Shack movie that it's just going out of Buell now. I guess it's run its course. But it's a story of a man who has lost his daughter to some child pedophile who wound up killing her. And his life is really in the valley of the dry bones. And he has so much anger at God for what has happened, for not saving his beautiful daughter. And he has this experience where he goes through his own vision on a weekend after he has a traffic accident. And he meets the Trinity. And they talk about forgiveness, about those characteristics that the Bible teaches, that they can call him back from a life that's just engrossed in a valley of dry bones, and will make him live again. That's the message this morning. There are times when we think life just can't go on, when we're experiencing a lot of pain, whether it be physical, emotional, or whatever. And Jesus comes to you in a special way and says, I am the life, I am new life, and I can help you to live again. And then he asks you and me, as we look around us and see people in their own valley of bones, to call out, come and live. Amen. Sermon hymn 629, about